mean, there used to be hundreds of them, even in Michigan. People at Chicago, Detroit, the biggest one there, John King Books, is still around. But if you go to most of the small towns, they can't afford to keep them open. The outlook for bricks and mortar used books it's sort of up in the air. It's just sort of tough. I was born in the Netherlands, in Friesland, in the Netherlands. We immigrated to Canada when I was a year old. I grew up in near Hamilton, Ontario, on a small farm in Jarvis, Ontario, and came here to go to Calvin in 1964. A few years later, I met my wife, and we got married in 1969, and I've been here ever since. Most of my life I spent as a financial planner. When we got married, my wife asked me if we had any life insurance, and I said no. And she said, well, I think we ought to get some. And so I happened to stop in at a place called Sun Life of Canada. They had an office on Cherry Street, corner of Cherry and College. And I'm probably the only person in the world that ever stopped in there to buy life insurance. And anyway, I was just in my last year in college, and so they wondered would I be willing to or would like to accept the job as an insurance agent. And so I interviewed with them, as it turns out, and they hired me, and the rest is sort of history. I spent 40 years selling life insurance and mutual funds and doing financial planning and stuff like that. So what came of that, I don't know. I met a lot of people in Grand Rapids and made a lot of contacts and planned well enough where I can afford to have a used bookstore and not worry too much about how much money I make. Well, I've always loved reading. When we immigrated from the Netherlands, my mother would get a magazine from my grandmother in Dutch called De Spiegel, and she would read these stories to us. And so I've always loved stories and books and stuff like that. In my first grade, our teacher gave us all a little Christmas present, and I got a coloring book, and the little girl behind me got a copy of Little Red Riding Hood. So I turned to her and says, "How about we switch? You get the coloring book, I get the Little Red Riding Hood." And she did, and that was my first book. So anyway, I've always loved reading, and I've always sort of had a dream of maybe opening a bookstore. The joke was that my wife said, "It's you or the books, buddy, somebody's got to go." So I thought I'd just open the bookstore, and I used to have breakfast next door all the time. And I came here, and we talked the lady into selling me the building, and we spent a year fixing it up. It was a photography shop at one time, and it was broken up into 6 or 7 little small rooms. And so we tore the whole thing apart, brought the ceiling back to the way it looks right now, and set up some shelves. And I started with maybe 3,000 books. My worry was I wouldn't have enough books ever to do anything. In fact, I offered to rent part of the building to friends so they could. But it didn't take long before those fears were allayed, and I would say within a year we had all these shelves filled. When I first opened, of course, we weren't well known. I've never done any advertising because what comes first, chicken or the egg, and it's very expensive to advertise. So I would think maybe I was into it for maybe a year, And I'd had a 2-day stint of no sales. And all of a sudden, the next day in the mail, I get a bill for $110 for you had to have a used something license. So I called the city and I said, what in the world is this all about? Well, she said, it's sort of a clerk kind of thing. We got to have something on record. Well, I said, how about I come down there and record this for you, and I'll put it away for you, and I'll save myself $110. Well, that didn't go very big. So it's just something the city requires for all, like pawn shops and all that kind of good stuff. And it just happened to come at the wrong time. You know, if I'd have made $1,000 a day before, it'd been one thing, but anyway. It'd be pretty hard to make a decent, to make a very good living in a used bookstore. My daughter works part-time and so she makes, part of a living here. I do it more as a hobby than, you'd have a hard time making a good living. But it's enough, I do it because because I love it. I love books and I love I like meeting people. I like the fact that people come in here all the time and say, look at all these books. Redux Books. We have a warehouse that my son runs that we have about 200,000 books in our warehouse, and we sell on Amazon, on ABE Books, and out of our inventory there, we probably ship out 100 books a day, mostly through Amazon. So books that we don't have room for here, we send over there to the warehouse, and they're sold online. Well, some of the things that cause me a little concern is there's too many used books out there, and it's hard enough to get people to pay $3 for a paperback, let alone significant money for what I think are collectible books. Well, there's lots of business expenses. I mean, there's the building, there's the upkeep, there's the rent and the heat and the electricity. Today you've got to have you've got to have the internet, you've got to have all that stuff. There's a lot of expenses involved. So by the time when I turn on the lights and open the door in the morning, I've spent a fair amount of money already for the day. Most of our books are bought by younger people. Some of the pricier stuff, that are costing hundreds of dollars, are maybe a little older people. But I would say that most of our stock is sold by people who are under 35. So.
Do you see a reason why that is?
Well, I don't know. Kids still like books. The whole e-book thing and stuff like that has seemed to run its course. I think people still read e-books on occasion, but I don't hear much talk about those kind of things anymore. So, yeah, people like to have a book. They like to have something they can open and look at and touch and taste and feel and smell and stuff. Like I said before, it's pretty hard to make a living here, and so you couldn't sell this to somebody and have them, unless there's a multi-millionaire who wants to just do it for the heck of it. But you couldn't sell this to somebody who would have to pay me and then try to make a living himself out of what he can sell out of here. So I'm hoping that I can stick around long enough and that my oldest son will able to be retire, and then he can sort of help take over and stuff like that. So that's sort of what we're hoping for. It's hard to say what can happen. What the bookstore means to me is wow. You know, it's just sort of the I don't want to say love of my life, because I have a wife and children and grandchildren whom I love dearly. But it certainly is a wonderful dream come true. I mean, how many people can actually say, you know, I'm able to do what I've dreamt of doing for years and years. So it means, yeah, it sort of means the world to me that to be able to be here. You know, somebody could offer me $5 million for this place, and you know, what would be the point? I'd have $5 million in the bank, but I'd be sitting at home staring at a bank account. But I'd much rather be here. It's not like I couldn't retire, but this is for me. People ask me all the time, why don't you retire? Well, I am retired. This is what I do. Some people go to the beach, or some people go to Florida for the winter or whatever. No, I'd rather come here and spend my day here. So yeah, that's what it means a lot to me.